Welcome to Dark Masquerade, chilling tales for late-night rainy. Listening in the quiet hours of the night, when rain taps softly against the window panes and shadows dance in the dim light, there exists a realm where stories take on a chilling allure. Welcome to Dark Masquerade, where the veil between reality and the eerie unknown is thin, and tales of suspense, mystery, and the supernatural come to life. As the rain drizzles outside, settle into your favorite cozy spot, perhaps with a warm cup of tea in hand. Let the rhythmic patter of raindrops create the perfect ambiance as you embark on a journey into the depths of darkness. Within the confines of these chilling tales, you'll encounter a myriad of characters, haunted souls, vengeful spirits, and enigmatic creatures that lurk in the shadows. Each story is woven with intricate detail, drawing you deeper into its unsettling grasp with every word whispered into the night. From forgotten legends to modern-day nightmares, Dark Masquerade offers a diverse array of narratives to tantalize the imagination. Whether you're drawn to psychological thrillers that delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche or spine-tingling ghost stories that send shivers down your spine, there's something within these pages to satisfy every craving for the macabre. But fear not, for within the darkness lies catharsis. As you immerse yourself in these tales of terror, you'll find solace in the art of storytelling itself, a beacon of light in the midst of the storm. So let the rain continue to fall as you surrender to the embrace of Dark Masquerade, where fear and fascination intertwine in the most mesmerizing of ways, guiding you gently into the realm of sleep. It was a dark and stormy night, the perfect setting for a horror story. A young couple, Lily and James, had just moved into their dream house. It was a beautiful Victorian home, with large windows and a mesmerizing spiral staircase. They couldn't believe their luck to find such a gem at such an affordable price. But little did they know, the house held a dark secret. A secret that would soon haunt their every waking moment. As they were unpacking their belongings, Lily caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the corner of her eye. Startled, she turned around but found nothing. She shrugged it off as her imagination and continued with her chores. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, they heard strange noises coming from the walls. It sounded like whispers and they couldn't make out what the voices were saying, but they decided to ignore it and went to sleep. But their peaceful sleep was interrupted by a loud banging on their bedroom door. James quickly got up and opened the door only to find no one there. He brushed it off as the wind and went back to bed. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Every night they would wake up to hear the same noises and see the same shadowy figure. They even started to notice strange symbols on the walls, written in what seemed like blood. Lily and James started to feel uneasy in their own home. Lily's once cheerful demeanor turned into one of constant fear and anxiety. James tried to assure her that it was all in her head. But deep down, even he was starting to doubt his own words. One night, Lily woke up to find herself being pulled out of bed by an unseen force. She screamed for James, who was fast asleep next to her. He woke up with a jolt, only to see Lily being dragged out of the room. He quickly got up and ran after her, but as soon as he reached the hallway, everything went silent. Panicked, he searched the entire house but couldn't find Lily. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. But then he heard her screams coming from the basement. He raced down the stairs and found Lily lying on the ground, surrounded by the same symbols that were on the walls. She was in a trance-like state, muttering words in a language they couldn't understand. James tried to wake her up, but she seemed to be possessed by something. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The temperature dropped rapidly, and they could see their breaths. And then, it appeared. A demon, with red eyes and a hideous face, taunted them. It revealed that the house was built on an ancient burial ground, and they had disturbed the spirits that were resting in peace. Realizing that they were in grave danger, James and Lily prayed for their lives. The demon laughed and vanished, leaving behind a strong smell of sulfur. Scared for their lives, Lily and James decided to leave the house immediately. But as soon as they stepped outside, they realized that the demon had followed them. It had no intentions of letting them go and would torment them for the rest of their lives. For Lily and Jamie's, their dream house turned into a living nightmare, one they would never forget. And the demon's haunting would become a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to cross its path. As night falls and the moon rises high in the sky, the peaceful town of Glenwood becomes engulfed in a dark and sinister presence. It is said that every decade, on the 13th of October, a demonic entity known as the Phantom of Glenwood unleashes its evil powers upon the town, causing terror and chaos. Rumors of the demon's existence have spread throughout the town for centuries, with many claiming to have encountered its wrath. Some say it was once a human, driven mad by the dark forces that consumed it, while others believe it to be a manifestation of pure evil. No one knows for sure how the demon came to be, but one thing is certain: those who crossed its path never survived to tell the tale. The night of the 13th was approaching, and the townspeople could feel a sense of unease in the air. The streets were deserted, and the once lively town had become eerily quiet. The only sounds that could be heard were the howling of the wind and the distant screams of the demon's victims. Among the many residents of Glenwood were Sarah and David, a young couple who had recently moved into the town. They were unaware of the town's dark secrets and the impending danger that awaited them. On the night of the 13th, as Sarah and David lay in bed, they heard strange noises coming from outside their window. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but as the sounds grew louder, they realized that something wasn't right. Suddenly, the room was filled with a putrid smell, and a cold breeze swept through the room, causing the candles to flicker. David got up to investigate, but before he could take a step, he saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes and a sinister grin. The room became engulfed in darkness as the figure approached, and Sarah and David could feel a chilling breath on their necks. The demon had finally revealed itself. As the demon spoke, its voice was filled with malice and hatred. It declared that it had chosen them as its next victims, and that they would suffer the same fate as the others who had crossed its path. Sarah and David tried to escape, but the doors and windows were sealed shut. The demon laughed as it watched them struggle, reveling in their fear. It then unleashed its demonic powers, causing the walls to bleed and the furniture to move on its own. Sarah and David were trapped in a nightmarish world of horror, where there was no escape from the demon's wrath. They screamed for help, but no one could hear them. They were at the mercy of the Phantom of Glenwood. As the night wore on, the demon tormented them with visions of their worst fears, driving them to the brink of insanity. They begged for mercy, but the demon showed no mercy, relishing in their suffering. In the morning, the townspeople found Sarah and David's lifeless bodies in their room, with a sinister grin etched on their faces. From that day on, the town was plagued by the demonic haunting, and the legend of the Phantom of Glenwood lived on, a constant reminder of the terror that lurked in the shadows. As Amelia walked through the abandoned house, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching her. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. She had been hired to do a feature on the history of this house, which was rumored to be haunted by a demonic entity. Being the skeptic that she was, Amelia didn't believe in ghosts or demons. But as she delved deeper into the history of the house, she couldn't ignore the unnerving stories that had been passed down for generations. According to the townspeople, the house was once owned by a family who practiced dark magic. They worshipped a demon and sacrificed innocent victims to please it. But one day the demon turned on them, possessing the entire family and causing them to kill each other in a violent and gruesome manner. Since then, the house was said to be cursed, and anyone who entered it would face the wrath of the demon. As Amelia explored the house, she couldn't deny the strange occurrences that she experienced. Doors would slam shut on their own, and she would hear whispers and cries coming from empty rooms. But what scared her the most was the demonic presence that she could feel lurking in every corner. On the final day of her visit, Amelia decided to conduct an overnight investigation. Armed with her camera and a recorder, she entered the house, determined to capture any evidence of the demonic haunting. As the night went on, the house seemed to come alive. Screeching laughter echoed through the halls, and objects began to fly across the rooms. Amelia's fear turned into terror as she realized that the stories were true and she was not alone in the house. In a state of panic, she ran towards the front door, only to find it locked. The demonic presence surrounded her, making it impossible for her to escape. She could feel its cold breath on her neck and hear its sinister whispers. Desperate for help, Amelia turned to the only option left. She began chanting the Lord's Prayer, hoping to banish the demon. To her surprise, the house fell silent, and the demonic presence vanished. Shaken and traumatized, Amelia fled the house, vowing to never return. As she looked back at the cursed house, she knew that the demon was still there, waiting for its next victim. From that day on, Amelia never spoke of the demonic haunting, fearing that it would bring the demon's wrath upon her once again. But deep down, she knew that the house was a ticking time bomb, waiting to unleash its horrors on anyone who dared to enter. And that was a secret that Amelia would carry with her for the rest of her life. The house had always had a reputation in the small town of Greyhaven. Locals whispered about the strange noises heard at night, the eerie shadows that seemed to lurk in the windows, and the family that had mysteriously disappeared years ago. It was said that the house was cursed, haunted by a demonic presence that tormented anyone who dared to enter its walls. But for newlywed Copley, Sarah, and Mikhail, the house was the perfect opportunity to start fresh. They had been searching for a home in the countryside and stumbled upon the abandoned Victorian house in Greyhaven. Despite the warnings from the townspeople, the couple saw potential in the old house and quickly made the purchase. At first, everything seemed perfect. Sarah and Michael were happy to have their own space and began to renovate the house. But as they started to settle in, strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut, furniture would move on its own, and they would hear whispers and footsteps during the night. At first, they shrugged off these occurrences as old house quirks, but things quickly took a dark turn. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the basement. Michael, being the brave one, grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. What he saw sent shivers down his spine. The walls were covered in ancient symbols and the air felt thick with malevolent energy. And in the corner of the room stood a figure with glowing red eyes. Michael fled from the basement, white as a sheet, and told Sarah they needed to leave immediately. But Sarah, being a skeptic, refused to believe her husband's story. She thought he was just stressed from the move and convinced him to stay a little longer. But as the days went on, the presence in the house grew more and more powerful. Sarah would wake up with scratches on her arms. Michael would have nightmares of being possessed, and they would both see the figure with red eyes lurking in the shadows. Desperately seeking answers, Sarah went to the local library to research the history of the house. She discovered that the previous owner, Amelia, was rumored to have dabbled in the occult and was obsessed with summoning demons. It was said that she had succeeded in summoning a powerful demon that possessed her and drove her to madness. It was also rumored that she sacrificed her entire family to the demon before disappearing. Feeling a sense of dread, Sarah rushed back to the house to warn Michael, but it was too late. The demonic presence had taken over Michael's body and he attacked Sarah, intent on sacrificing her to the demon. In a moment of clarity, Michael managed to break free from the demon's grasp and sacrificed himself instead, banishing the demon from the house. But as Sarah wept over her husband's lifeless body, she heard a malicious laughter and turned to see the figure with red eyes standing over her. Amelia had returned, and she needed another host to fulfill her demonic desires. Sarah, now possessed, was doomed to spend eternity in the cursed house, forever haunted by the demonic presence and forced to carry out its sinister bidding. The House of Greyhaven would continue to be a place of terror, claiming victims who dared to enter and succumbing to the darkness that lingered within. I never believed in ghosts. I thought they were just stories, made up by people to scare each other. That was until I started working at the morgue. I was fresh out of college and desperately looking for a job in my field. So when I saw an opening for a mortician at the local morgue, I jumped at the opportunity. I'd always been fascinated by the human body, and the thought of working with the deceased didn't bother me. But my first day on the job proved to be more than I bargained for. As I walked through the dimly lit hallways of the morgue, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every hair on my body stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to brush off the unease and told myself it was just my first day nerves. But as the days went on, the feeling only intensified. I would hear whispers and see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I chalked it up to the old and creepy morgue atmosphere, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Then strange things started to happen. Bodies would mysteriously move from one slab to another, their limbs contorted in impossible positions. The eerie whispers turned into menacing laughter that seemed to echo through the hallways, and I would often find my tools scattered around the room, as if someone had intentionally messed with them. My colleagues shrugged it off as pranks or my imagination, but I knew there was something more sinister at work. I started to dread going to work, but I needed the job and didn't want to seem like a coward. The turning point came one night when I was working alone. As I was preparing a body for an autopsy, I heard a chilling voice whisper my name. My heart skipped a beat and I looked around, but there was no one there. Brushing it off as my imagination, I continued with my work. But then, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one behind me. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with something otherworldly. I knew I had to find out the truth behind the haunting at the morgue. I stayed late one night and started to investigate. As I dug through old records, I discovered that the building the morgue was housed in was once used as a satanic ritual site. Rumors had it that a group of cultists had sacrificed a young girl, and her body was never found. I knew then that the presence in the morgue was not a ghost, but a demon, a demonic entity that preyed on the souls of the dead and tormented the living. Armed with this knowledge, I performed a cleansing ritual in the morgue. But the demon was not going to go down without a fight. The lights flickered and the temperature dropped rapidly. I could hear the demon's laughter echoing around me, taunting me. But I stood my ground and continued the ritual. I could feel the demon's presence getting weaker and weaker until finally it was gone. The eerie ambiance of the morgue was replaced with a sense of calm and peace. Since that night, the morgue has been quiet. No more strange occurrences, no more whispers or shadows. I have even started to enjoy my job, knowing that I have banished the evil that once resided there. But every now and then, I can't help but wonder if the demon was truly gone, or if it was just biding its time, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I've always been drawn to the morbid and macabre, so when I landed a job at the local morgue, I was ecstatic. I spent my days surrounded by the dead, feeling alive and fulfilled in a way I never had before. Little did I know, my fascination with death would lead me down a path of terror and torment. It all started innocently enough. The first few weeks at the morgue were uneventful, sometimes even peaceful. I enjoyed the quietness of the place, the feeling of being alone with the deceased. But then, things began to change. I would start to hear strange noises coming from the bodies, whispers and giggles that sent shivers down my spine. At first, I dismissed them as my imagination, but soon they became impossible to ignore. One night, as I was doing a routine check on the bodies, I felt a cold hand grab my wrist. I turned around expecting to see a colleague playing a prank on me, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off as my mind playing tricks on me and went back to my work. But then the bodies started to move on their own. It was subtle at first, just a twitch here and there. But as the days went by, their movements became more violent and purposeful. It was as if they were trying to communicate with me. I tried to tell my boss about the strange occurrences, but he just laughed it off and said it was my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew it was something more, something sinister. I started to spend less and less time at the morgue, dreading the nights that I had to work. But eventually, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I was scheduled for the night shift, alone in the morgue. As I walked through the dimly lit hallways, I could feel eyes watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on my tasks, trying to get through the night as quickly as possible. And then I saw it. A figure, standing at the end of the hallway. It was tall and shadowy, with red glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I froze in fear, unable to move or scream. The figure slowly started to move towards me, its body contorting in unnatural ways. I wanted to run, to escape the morgue and never look back. But I was paralyzed with fear. The figure was now only a few feet away from me, and that's when I saw it. Its face, or lack thereof, was just a gaping black hole with rows of sharp teeth. I finally found the courage to scream, but before I could make a sound, The figure lunged at me, its cold grasp wrapping around my throat. I struggled to break free, but I was no match for the demonic entity. For what felt like hours, it tortured me, whispering words of death and despair into my ear. When I finally woke up, I was in a hospital bed, with my boss sitting beside me, looking concerned. He explained that they found me unconscious in the morgue and called an ambulance. I tried to tell him about the demon, about everything that had happened, but he just shook his head and told me it was all just a nightmare. But I know the truth. The demon still haunts me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to return and finish what it started. I can never set foot in that morgue again, but the memories and the nightmares will stay with me forever. The living may fear death, but it's the dead that we should truly fear. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway of the abandoned morgue, I couldn't shake off the sense of dread that enveloped me. The walls were covered in peeling paint and the musty smell of death lingered in the air. I had always been fascinated by horror stories, but I never imagined that I would one day find myself in the midst of one. My name is Emily, and I am a freelance journalist. I had been assigned to write an intriguing piece on the infamous abandoned morgue of our city. The morgue had a notorious history with countless tales of paranormal activities and unexplained deaths. I was skeptical about all the stories, but I wanted to delve deeper and uncover the truth. As I stepped into the morgue, I felt a chill run down my spine. The autopsy room was the first area I explored. The stainless steel autopsy table still had dried bloodstains on it, and the rusted tools scattered around it sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't imagine the horror that must have taken place in this room, but that was only the beginning. As I made my way to the first cold storage room, I heard strange whispers. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But as I entered the room, I couldn't deny the sudden drop in temperature. The body refrigerators were still intact, and with each step I took, I felt as though someone was watching me. I quickly made my way to the next room, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. But as I entered the second cold storage room, I was frozen in fear. The bodies inside the refrigerators were not just corpses, but mangled, disfigured forms with bloodshot eyes staring at me. I stumbled backward in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to continue exploring. I entered another room, which was once the morgue's office. The walls were adorned with images of demons and pentagrams. The desk was overturned and covered in blood-stained papers. As I looked around, I noticed a peculiar symbol etched on the wall. It was a symbol of a demon, and it sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was as if the morgue was a haven for dark forces. I decided to leave the morgue and come back another day with more equipment to capture evidence. But as I turned to leave, I heard someone whisper my name. I froze in fear as the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was alone in the morgue, and there was no one around who could have whispered my name. I slowly turned around and my worst fears came true. Standing in front of me was a tall, dark figure with blood-red eyes and horns protruding from its head. Its face was contorted into a sinister grin, revealing razor-sharp teeth. I was paralyzed with fear as the demon let out a chilling laugh. I could feel its presence, and I knew that I was in grave danger. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The demon's laughter grew louder as it started to advance towards me. I mustered all my courage and screamed for help, hoping that someone would hear me. But my screams echoed through the morgue, and there was no one there to save me. Just as the demon was about to grab me, I felt a sudden force pushing me. I fell to the ground and quickly scrambled to my feet, not looking back as I ran for my life. I didn't stop until I reached the exit, and I never looked back. I could still hear the demon's mocking laughter echoing through the empty hallways. I couldn't believe that what I had just experienced was real. The demon, the whispers, the mangled bodies. It all felt like a nightmare. But it was all too real. I shook with fear as I sat in my car trying to process what had just happened. After that terrifying encounter, I never stepped foot in the abandoned morgue again. But that incident changed me in ways I couldn't imagine. I became obsessed with the morgue and the demonic forces that resided there. I started reading books on demonology and paranormal investigations. As I dug deeper into the morgue's history, I discovered that it was not always abandoned. It was a functional morgue until a few decades ago when a series of unexplained deaths occurred. These deaths were linked to the devil-worshipping cult that allegedly used the morgue as their sacrificial ground. I also found out that many people who had visited the morgue experienced paranormal activity just like me. Some claimed to have been attacked by an invisible force, while others reported seeing the same demon that had confronted me. The more I delved into the morgue's history, the more I was convinced that the place was truly cursed. My curiosity and obsession led me to visit the morgue again, in the hope of capturing evidence of the demon's existence. This time, I was better prepared, with cameras, voice recorders, and other equipment to document any paranormal activity. As I entered the morgue, I felt a chill run down my spine. The atmosphere was thick with an eerie silence. I started my investigation in the autopsy room, where I had my first encounter with the demon. I could feel its presence, but I was determined not to let fear consume me. I moved on to the cold storage rooms, where I placed cameras in strategic locations. I also set up voice recorders to capture any electronic voice phenomenon, EVP. As I finished setting up my equipment, I noticed the same symbol I had seen on the office wall etched on one of the body refrigerators. It sent shivers down my spine, and I knew that I was walking into danger once again. As the night went on, I started to feel a slight pressure on my head. I brushed it off as exhaustion, but the pressure kept increasing. I continued my investigation, determined to capture some solid evidence. At one point, I heard someone whisper my name, just like the first time. But this time, I was not afraid. I had a sense of familiarity, as if the demon and I were old acquaintances. But just as I was about to conclude my investigation, things took a terrifying turn. I was in the autopsy room, examining the footage from my cameras when I heard a loud bang. It was coming from the cold storage rooms. I cautiously made my way to the rooms, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The body refrigerators had been opened, and the corpses were missing. In their place were the mangled, disfigured bodies that I had seen on my first visit. But this time, they were moving, their bloodshot eyes fixed on me. I was paralyzed with fear as the bodies moved closer and circled around me. Suddenly, the body refrigerators slammed shut, and the corpses disappeared, leaving me alone in the empty morgue. I was breathing heavily, my body covered in cold sweat. But my terror didn't end there. As I tried to make my way out, I found the exit mysteriously locked. I was trapped in the morgue with no way out. I could hear strange whispers and see shadows moving around me. I knew that I was not alone in the morgue, and for the first time I was genuinely terrified. I could feel the demon's presence, and I knew that I was in grave danger. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw the demon standing in front of me. Its blood-red eyes pierced through me, and its sinister grin sent chills down my spine. The demon let out a chilling laugh as it spoke to me in a deep, demonic voice. "You have been warned, Emily. Leave this place and never come back," it said before disappearing into thin air. In that moment, I realized that I had been spared by the demon. I was terrified, but I was also grateful that I had made it out alive. As I made my way out of the morgue, I vowed never to return to that cursed place. The next day, I submitted my article on the haunted morgue, but I left out my personal encounter with the demonic forces. I didn't want to risk anyone else's life by revealing the truth. Even though it was a story that would have made headlines, I couldn't bear the thought of putting anyone else in danger. I learned my lesson. Some places are better left alone. The abandoned morgue will always remain a place of horror and mystery, a place where I came face to face with the demonic forces that still reside there. As for me, I will continue to write about my encounter, but from a safe distance, far from the cursed morgue. As the tales unfold, we invite you to like, comment, and share this video with your fellow thrill seekers. Spread the whispers of the night far and wide, inviting others to join our gathering beneath the moon's watchful gaze. But our invitation doesn't end there. We want to hear from you, dear viewers. Share with us your favorite stories from the depths of the night. Which tale sent chills racing down your spine? Which character lingered in your thoughts long after the final word was spoken? And if you dare, share with us your own encounters with the unknown. Have you ever glimpsed a shadowy figure in the corner of your eye? Or felt a chill run down your spine in the dead of night? Let us know in the comments below, and Tugather will weave a tapestry of tales that will linger in the darkness long after the final whisper fades away. So join us, dear viewers, in the dark masquerade. Like, comment, and share, and let your voice be heard in the symphony of the night. As a horror enthusiast, I have always been drawn to the thrill and terror of demonic entities. However, nothing could have prepared me for the horrifying ordeal I experienced one night while driving. It was a typical Friday night, and I was returning home after a long day at work. The clock struck midnight as I began my journey back home on a long, deserted road. The air was thick, and I could feel the tension building up inside me. I switched on my car stereo to ease my nerves, hoping some music would distract me from the eerie silence that surrounded me. As I continued to drive, I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I glanced in my rearview mirror but saw nothing. I tried to brush it off as my overactive imagination, but the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, my headlights caught onto a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a dark silhouette, cloaked in a long black robe. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The figure began to approach my car, and I could feel the air getting colder. A chill ran down my spine as it came closer, and as it reached the front of my car, I could see its face. It was a tall, gaunt, and pale man with glowing red eyes, a malicious grin, and sharp, pointed teeth. I couldn't help but gasp in terror as I realized I was face to face with a demonic entity. With trembling hands, I tried to start my car, but it wouldn't budge. The entity slowly circled my car, scratching its long, bony fingers against the metal, making a chilling, screeching sound. I could feel my heart beating in my throat as all my attempts to escape failed. Suddenly it stopped and stared directly at me. I could feel its intense gaze piercing through my soul. I tried to look away, but I was paralyzed with fear. And then it spoke in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "Hello, human, I have been waiting for you. Don't be afraid, I promise to make your death quick." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was certain that this was it. I was going to die. My mind was racing, and I knew I had to do something to survive. I remembered hearing that demonic entities have no power over people who are not afraid of them, so I tried to calm myself down and project an image of strength. The entities seemed to sense my resistance and let out a blood-curdling laugh. It then disappeared into thin air, leaving me alone on the deserted road. I quickly started my car and drove off, my heart racing in my chest. I was relieved to have escaped it, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that it was not over yet. As I drove, I could see the entity in my rearview mirror, following me with a malicious grin. I knew I had to get rid of this demonic presence, so I drove faster, hoping to leave it behind. But no matter how fast I went, it was still behind me, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. I could feel its evil intentions, and I knew I had to do something before it caught up to me. I remembered reading that holy objects could ward off demonic entities. Panic-stricken, I searched frantically for something holy in my car. Finally, I found a small cross tucked away in the glove compartment. I clutched onto it tightly, praying for it to protect me. To my horror, the entity grew even more powerful and started to manifest on my front windshield. Its face was now distorted, and its laughter was deafening. I could feel its hands reaching out to me, trying to break the protective shield I had created with the cross. In a desperate attempt to ward it off, I held out the cross toward the windshield, but it only made the entity angrier. Suddenly, the windshield shattered into pieces and the entity entered my car. I could feel its cold breath on my face, and before I could react, it spoke again. "I see you have found a way to resist my power, but remember, I am not alone. We will meet again." And with that, it disappeared into thin air, leaving me in a state of utter shock and terror. I was shaking uncontrollably, but I knew I had to get out of there as soon as possible. I drove home as fast as I could, constantly looking behind me and expecting the entity to reappear at any moment. But thankfully, I reached home safely. As I entered my house, I was exhausted and traumatized by the horrific encounter. I couldn't believe what had just happened and felt lucky to be alive. I vowed to never drive on that deserted road again, especially not at night. The experience left me scarred for life, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that the demonic entity would come back for me. I still have nightmares about that night, reliving the terror and helplessness I felt in the presence of pure evil. I have shared my story with friends and family, but most of them refuse to believe it, labeling it as a figment of my imagination. But I know what I saw and experienced was real, and I warn everyone to be cautious while driving at night, for you never know what evil could be lurking in the darkness. In the end, I have come to realize that the world is full of unexplainable and terrifying things. Whether you believe in the existence of demonic entities or not, it is always better to be safe than sorry. So next time you find yourself driving on a deserted road at night, remember my story and be on the lookout, for you never know what horrors may await you on the dark, empty roads. As I sit here in the dimly lit office, surrounded by the eerie silence of the night, I cannot help but feel a sense of unease wash over me. This is my routine, being one of the few employees who are assigned to work after hours in this building. But something about tonight feels different, something sinister in the air that makes my heart race and my spine tingle. You see, this office building is not your typical 9-to-5 workplace. It is rumored to be built upon an old cemetery, and many believe that the spirits of the dead still roam these halls long after the living have gone home. I scoffed at these silly superstitions when I first started working here, thinking it was all just a ploy to make the place seem more exciting. But as the hours tick by, I begin to wonder if there is a grain of truth to these stories. It all started a few months ago when one of the security guards, who had been with the company for years, went missing during his night shift. His colleagues searched the entire building, but he was nowhere to be found. The only evidence of his presence was his abandoned post at the front desk, the security camera footage showing a flicker of movement before it cut off. The police were called and a thorough investigation was initiated, but there were no leads, no evidence of foul play. Eventually, the case was closed, and the missing guard was simply declared dead. Ever since that incident, there have been strange occurrences in this building after hours. Some of my colleagues have reported feeling a cold breath on the back of their necks when no one else is around. Others have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their eyes. And then there are the whispers, faint but distinct, that echo through the empty hallways. We have all tried to brush it off as our imagination playing tricks on us, but deep down we all know that something is not right in this place. Tonight, as I sit at my desk, staring at the computer screen in front of me, I cannot shake off the feeling that I am being watched. It's almost as if someone, or something, is standing behind me, observing my every move. With a gulp, I turn around, half expecting to see a ghostly figure staring back at me. But there is nothing, just the fluorescent lights buzzing above and the rows of empty cubicles. I try to focus on my work, but my mind keeps wandering to the missing security guard. What if he had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have? What if he had uncovered the truth about this place, and it cost him his life? The thought alone sends shivers down my spine. I shake my head, trying to shake off these intrusive thoughts, and continue typing away at my keyboard. Suddenly, I hear a loud crash from the other end of the office. My heart leaps into my throat as I stand up from my desk, my eyes darting around the room. Did I imagine that sound? Or was it something or someone trying to communicate with me? I take a deep breath and tell myself it's nothing, just the usual office noises. But deep down, I know it's not that simple. I decide to take a walk around the building, telling myself it will help calm my nerves and maybe, just maybe, I'll find some evidence or explanation for the strange occurrences. As I make my way down the dark hallways, I feel an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. It's almost as if the silence is being broken by the sound of whispers, getting louder and louder with each step I take. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a flicker of movement. I turn to see what it was, but there is nothing. I tell myself that it's just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched intensifies. I quicken my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, when I suddenly hear a loud shriek echoing through the halls. I freeze in my tracks, trying to pinpoint where the sound is coming from, but it seems to be coming from all around me. In a state of panic, I try to make my way back to my desk, but the layout of the building seems to have changed. The once familiar hallways now seem like a never-ending maze, and I cannot find my way back. I feel like I'm being pulled in different directions, my mind playing tricks on me, making me lose my grip on reality. Just then, I see the unmistakable figure of the missing security guard standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I gasp and take a step back, but he walks towards me, his movements almost robotic. I want to run, but my feet are rooted to the ground. As he gets closer, I can see that his uniform is ripped and stained, and there are deep scratches on his face. I realize with horror that this is not the same security guard, but a twisted version of him. A demonic presence that poses a threat to anyone who dares to cross its path. I close my eyes and count to 3, gathering all my courage to look up and face this abomination. But just as I do, the lights flicker and the guard is gone. In his place stands a figure that I can only describe as pure evil. Its eyes are blood red, and its mouth is stretched into a sinister grin. I scream and run as fast as I can, not looking back until I reach my desk and lock myself in my office. I sit in my chair, my hands shaking and my heart beating out of my chest. I try to collect myself and think rationally. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or perhaps it was all a dream. But deep down I know it was real and I may not make it out alive if I stay in this building any longer. I grab my things and make a run for the exit, not daring to look back. As I step out into the cool night air, I realize that I have never felt so relieved to be outside. I vow never to return to that office building after hours and to warn others of its demonic presence. Because no job is worth risking your life for, and this office building is a living nightmare. Much worse than any horror story I have ever heard. As a graveyard undertaker, my job is to ensure that the final resting place of the dead is well maintained and peaceful. I have been working in the graveyard for the past 10 years and had my fair share of eerie experiences. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered last night. I am still shaken to the core, sitting in my office and writing this, reliving the horror that unfolded before my very eyes. It was a typical night at the graveyard, with the moon shining high up in the sky and the only sound breaking the silence was the occasional rustling of leaves. I was putting the finishing touches on a freshly dug grave when I heard a faint whisper behind me. I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been the wind, and continued with my work. But as the night wore on, the whispers became more distinct and menacing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping into me, telling myself it was all in my head. As I was locking up the gates and getting ready to go home, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the graveyard. It was a tall, lanky man clad in a black cloak, and his face was hidden behind the hood. As I approached him, I noticed his eyes were glowing a bright red, and I could feel his malevolent gaze piercing through me. Without saying a word, he turned and started walking towards the nearby mausoleum. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed him. But as soon as I stepped inside the mausoleum, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside with the mysterious figure. I could hear him chuckling, and a voice whispered in my head, "You have entered my domain, and now you shall never leave." My heart was racing, and I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move a muscle. The centuries-old coffins and the musty smell of decay only added to the horror of the situation. Just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of shuffling, and the coffins started to open one by one. The undead emerged, their lifeless eyes fixed on me, their mouths open in a silent scream. I could feel their cold, clammy hands trying to grab me, and I frantically tried to escape, but it was as if an invisible force was holding me back. The figure in the black cloak appeared in front of me, and I could see his face now, or rather the lack of it. His skin was rotting, and he had no eyes, just empty sockets oozing with darkness. His lips curled into a malicious smile, and he said, "Welcome to my world where the dead never rest and the living are condemned to eternal torment." I knew then that I was in the presence of something demonic. The whispers that haunted me all night were his doing, and the undead were under his command. I was trembling with fear, knowing that I might never make it out alive. But then, a glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. The figure seemed to be in pain, and he said, "I have been trapped in this cursed mausoleum for centuries, and I need a new vessel to escape. You will do nicely." As terrified as I was, I knew I had to find a way to escape this evil entity. I prayed for strength and courage and tried to think of a plan. Suddenly, a voice in my head whispered, "The key, find the key." I scanned the room frantically and saw a rusty key hanging on the wall. I made a run for it, grabbed the key, and unlocked the door, just as the undead were about to grab me. The mausoleum door opened and I ran for my life, not daring to look back. Once I was safely outside, I collapsed, panting and shaking. It was only then that I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. As I sat there trying to calm my nerves, I saw the dark figure emerge from the mausoleum, his eyes blazing with fury. But he couldn't leave the confines of the graveyard, and as the first rays of sunlight appeared, he vanished into thin air, taking his undead minions with him. I stumbled back to my office, my mind reeling from the events of the night. I knew I had to quit my job as a graveyard undertaker, but deep down, I also knew that the demonic entity was still lurking in the graveyard, waiting for its next victim. But I had to warn others about the danger that lurked within those gates. I called the local authorities and told them everything that had happened. Of course, they didn't believe me, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes. But as I led them to the mausoleum, they saw the evidence for themselves. The rusty key was still hanging on the wall, and the mausoleum was covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. The authorities searched the entire graveyard, but there was no sign of the demonic entity or the undead. They told me I must have had a nightmare, and I was just relieved that it was all over. But even as I write this, I know that the evil entity is still there, biding its time, waiting for its next opportunity to escape and wreak havoc on this world. I quit my job and moved far away from the graveyard, but I still have nightmares about that fateful night. I have come to realize that there are some things in this world that cannot be explained by science or logic. Some things are beyond our understanding, and for our own safety, it's better not to delve into the realm of the unknown. So, if you ever come across a graveyard undertaker with a haunted look in their eyes, know that they have seen things that would make your blood run cold. And beware. For the next time the moon shines bright and the only sound in the graveyard is the rustling of leaves, it might not just be the wind. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that sends chills down your spine and makes you want to huddle under the covers. I had just arrived at my off-grid homestead in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. The nearest town was miles away, and the only source of light was the flickering lantern that I had brought with me. But little did I know, this night was going to be the start of a living nightmare. I had always dreamed of living off-grid, away from the chaos of city life. So when I stumbled upon this remote piece of land surrounded by nothing but trees and silence, I knew it was meant to be. The previous owner had warned me of the strange occurrences that had taken place on the land, but I dismissed it as mere superstitions and moved in anyway. As I made my way to the small cabin that would be my home, the wind howled and the trees rustled ominously. The rain lashed against my jacket, as if trying to warn me of the dangers that awaited me. But I was determined to make this place my own, and nothing was going to scare me away. I settled into my new home, and soon got into a routine of tending to my vegetable garden, collecting rainwater and chopping wood for my fireplace. Life was simple and peaceful, just the way I had always wanted it. However, that peace was short-lived. One night, while I was sitting by the fireplace reading a book, I heard a loud noise coming from outside. It sounded like someone was banging on the front door. I cautiously made my way to the door and peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. Just as I was about to dismiss it as the sound of the wind, I heard a voice whisper my name. My heart raced and my palms began to sweat. How could someone know my name in such a remote location? I tried to brush it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I quickly locked all the doors and windows and tried to go to sleep. But just as I was about to doze off, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window. They were slow and deliberate, as if someone was purposefully trying to scare me. I mustered up the courage to look outside, but all I could see was darkness and the faint glow of my lantern. The next morning, I woke up to find that all the vegetables in my garden had been uprooted and thrown around. It was as if someone had been stomping on them all night. I searched the perimeter of my property but found no signs of a break-in or any other human presence. That's when I remembered the strange occurrences that the previous owner had warned me about. I decided to do some research about the history of my off-grid homestead. To my horror, I discovered that the land had a dark past. It had once been owned by a family who had died under mysterious circumstances. Rumors of a demonic presence haunting the land had spread, leading the locals to believe that the family had been killed by the devil himself. The land had been abandoned ever since. I couldn't believe that I had moved into a place with such a dark history, but I was determined to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. That night, I sat by my fireplace and read all about exorcisms and ways to ward off evil spirits. I even made crosses out of twigs and hung them around my cabin. I thought I had it all under control, but little did I know. The demon had other plans. The following night, I was awakened by a loud crash from the kitchen. I grabbed my flashlight and crept towards the source of the noise. As I entered the kitchen, I saw the shelves had been thrown off the wall, and all my jars of food were smashed on the floor. But what scared me the most was the message written in blood on the wall. "Get out." My heart was pounding so loud that I thought it would burst out of my chest. I immediately packed my bags and ran out of the house, not looking back. As I made my way towards the nearest town, I could feel the presence of the demon following me, taunting me with its wicked laughter. After that horrifying experience, I never returned to my off-grid homestead. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched even in the safety of my new home in the city. The demon had permanently marked me, and I knew that it would never leave me alone. Years went by, and the memories of that fateful night started to fade. I had moved on with my life and had all but forgotten about my off-grid homestead. That was until one day I received a visit from the new owners of the land. They had also experienced strange occurrences and had come to seek my help. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go back to the homestead with them. As we approached the cabin, I could feel a heavy sense of dread settling in, but I pushed it aside and focused on helping the new owners. We gathered around the fireplace and I told them my story, warning them of the danger that lurked in the shadows. They didn't believe me and brushed it off as an overactive imagination. But as the night went on, strange things started to happen. The lanterns started to flicker, the doors and windows began to bang, and we could hear footsteps on the roof. In a state of panic, we ran out of the cabin and into the darkness. And that's when we saw it, a figure standing in the woods, its eyes glowing a bright red. The new owners started to believe me now as we huddled together, frozen with terror. The figure began to move towards us, its long arms dragging against the ground and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. We ran as fast as we could towards the nearest town, not looking back until we were safe inside the local church. The demon had finally revealed itself and made its intentions clear. It wanted us gone. As I sit here shaking and traumatized by the events of that night, I can't help but regret ever stepping foot on that cursed land. The demonic presence that resided there had awakened something inside of me, a fear that I can never escape. And although the off-grid homestead may now have new owners, I will always remember that night as the one that changed my life forever. My heart was pounding as I walked through the dense forest towards my off-grid homestead. It had been a long journey, but I was finally here. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs, and the rustling of leaves under my boots echoed through the stillness of the forest. As the adrenaline pumped through my body, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up on me. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a demonic horror story I will never forget. I had always yearned for a simpler life, away from the chaos of the city. So when I stumbled upon this remote piece of land, I knew it was meant to be. The homestead was a small wooden cabin nestled in the heart of the forest. No neighbors, no cell reception, just the sound of nature and the company of my thoughts. It was the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of modern life. But little did I know, this homestead held a dark secret. As I approached the cabin, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a chill ran down my spine. I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks on me and continued towards the cabin. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. The cabin seemed to emit a faint red glow. Confused, I quickened my pace to get a better look. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The windows were smeared with red handprints, and the door had a large, ominous symbol carved into it. It was a pentagram, unmistakably, My heart was racing as I hesitantly pushed open the creaky door. The inside of the cabin was just as unsettling as the exterior. The walls were covered in crude drawings of demonic figures, and the air was heavy with a putrid smell. I tried to brush off the feeling of dread that was slowly taking over me, but I couldn't shake it off. As I explored the cabin, I stumbled upon a small wooden box tucked in the corner of the living room. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Inside were old, tattered books with strange symbols and writings that I couldn't decipher. I also found a journal filled with pages upon pages of handwritten entries. I began to read, and what I discovered was beyond my worst nightmares. The previous owners of this homestead were a family of occultists who had performed dark rituals in this very cabin. They had summoned a demon and it had possessed their daughter. It had driven them to madness and ultimately led to their demise. As I read through the journal, I couldn't believe what I was learning. I had unknowingly stumbled upon a cursed homestead, and it seemed that history was about to repeat itself. Frantically, I tried to come up with a plan to rid the cabin of the demonic presence, but it was too late. As the night fell, the cabin came to life with a sinister energy. Strange noises echoed through the walls, and I could feel a cold presence lingering in the air. I could sense that I was not alone. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me and the lights flickered, leaving me in complete darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest as I fumbled for my flashlight. But before I could turn it on, a voice whispered in my ear, "Welcome to your new home." I froze in terror as I realized that I was not alone in the cabin. The demonic entity had been waiting for me, and it had no intention of letting me leave. Panicking, I ran towards the door, frantically trying to open it. But it refused to budge as if it was sealed shut. I was trapped in this cursed cabin with a demon. For hours, I sat in the corner of the living room, clutching onto the journal for dear life. The demonic presence lurked in every corner, and I could hear its sinister whisperings in my mind. I couldn't take it anymore, and in a moment of desperation, I began to recite the incantations I had found in the journal. I had no idea if it would work, but I had to try. Suddenly, the cabin began to shake violently, and the air was filled with a deafening screech. The demon was enraged, and it was coming for me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst, but instead I was greeted with a blinding light and the sound of metal clashing. As I opened my eyes, I saw a figure standing in front of me, holding a sword of holy light. It was a priest, and he had come to exorcise the demon. The next few hours were a blur as the priest performed a grueling exorcism. I could hear screams of agony and the sound of objects being thrown around the cabin, but I was too weak to move. When the ritual was over, all was silent. The cabin was still and the red glow was gone. The priest helped me out of the cabin, and as we walked towards his car, I couldn't help but look back at the homestead. It was no longer the cursed cabin that had almost ended my life. It was just a small wooden cabin in the middle of the forest. As I drove away from the homestead, I couldn't believe what I had experienced. It felt like a nightmare, but the journal and the priest's account of the past events proved otherwise. I never returned to the off-grid homestead again. The memories of that night still haunt me, and I can't shake off the feeling that it all happened because of my desire for a simpler life. The demonic horror story of the off-grid homestead will always be a cautionary tale in my mind. A reminder that sometimes the simple life we crave can lead us down a path of unimaginable horror. As I sit alone in my off-grid homestead, surrounded by the thick trees and the eerie silence of the night, I can't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. This homestead was meant to be a peaceful escape, a refuge from the chaos of the modern world. But now, I realize that I may have made the gravest mistake of my life by choosing to live here. It all began a few months ago when I stumbled upon this abandoned property in the middle of the woods. The previous owners had long passed away, and the place was left to rot in solitude. As an introvert who yearned for a simpler and quieter lifestyle, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to start anew. However, I soon discovered that this place had a dark and sinister past. The villagers whispered about it in hushed tones, warning me to stay away. But I shrugged off their warnings, thinking it was just another old wives' tale to scare off outsiders. Little did I know the horrors that awaited me in this seemingly idyllic homestead. The first few days were peaceful as I spent my time setting up my new home. I had no electricity, no internet, and no phone reception, but I found comfort in the simplicity of living off the grid. The only source of light came from the kerosene lamps I had stocked up on, adding to the rustic charm of the place. But as the sun set on my third day, things started to take a sinister turn. I heard strange noises coming from the woods outside my cabin. At first, I dismissed it as the usual sounds of wildlife, but as the noises grew louder and more persistent, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Whenever I stepped out to investigate, the noises would stop, and I would be left standing in the dark, feeling foolish and paranoid. But it was during the nights that the real terror began. I would often wake up to find my windows open, even though I was sure I had closed and locked them before going to bed. My belongings would be scattered around, and sometimes I would find scratches on the wooden floors, as if something had been clawing at them. I was scared, but I convinced myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and that I was imagining things. However, my rationalizations were shattered one night when I woke up to a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman dressed in a white gown, her hair matted and tangled, and her eyes filled with malice. I screamed and reached for my lamp, but as soon as the light hit her, she vanished into thin air. I was left trembling and sweating, realizing that this was not a figment of my imagination. The following days and nights were filled with more strange occurrences. I would often wake up with bruises or scratches on my body, with no recollection of how I got them. My belongings would go missing only to reappear in the most unexpected places, and sometimes I would catch glimpses of shadowy figures darting around outside my cabin. I was terrified and desperately sought help from the villagers, but they remained tight-lipped and warned me to leave the homestead immediately. They told me that this place was cursed, and anyone who dared to live here would meet a gruesome fate. But I was stubborn and determined to make this my home, refusing to let some superstition scare me away. However, my resolve was tested when one night, the woman in white appeared again, this time with a warning. She spoke in a low, raspy voice, telling me to leave before it's too late. I was puzzled and begged her to explain, but she simply disappeared, leaving me more confused and frightened than ever. As the days passed, the paranormal experiences only got worse. My dreams were plagued with nightmares, my body was plagued with injuries, and the cabin itself seemed to have a life of its own. Doors would creak open and objects would move on their own, as if controlled by some unseen force. I was certain that this place was haunted, and I was living in the midst of a demonic presence. One day, while rummaging through the attic, I stumbled upon an old journal belonging to the previous owners. The journal was filled with disturbing entries, detailing their descent into madness and their belief that the woods were home to a powerful demon. They had conducted dark rituals to appease the demon, hoping to gain wealth and power. But instead, they were consumed by their own greed and ended up sacrificing their own souls to the very entity they had summoned. I read the last entry, written in a shaky hand, where they had begged for forgiveness and pleaded for the demon to spare them. But it was too late. The demon had claimed their souls and had been terrorizing anyone who dared to live on the property ever since. It all made sense now. The strange noises, the shadowy figures, and the woman in white were all manifestations of the demon's presence. It had been toying with me, trying to break me down and claim my soul just like it did with the previous owners. I knew then that I had to leave, but the demon wouldn't let me go so easily. The night before I planned to pack up and leave, it unleashed its full fury on me. I heard growls and hisses coming from all around me, and the walls of the cabin shook violently. The woman in white appeared one last time, this time with a face contorted in rage. She screamed and clawed at me, trying to drag me out of bed and into the darkness outside. I fought back with all my might, and eventually, the attack stopped. I was left battered and bruised, but I had survived the demon's wrath. With a newfound determination, I gathered my belongings and left the homestead, never looking back. I knew that I would never be able to find peace in that cursed place. As I drove away, I could feel the weight of the demon's presence lift off of me, and I knew I had escaped with my life. Now, as I sit here in the comfort of my new home, I can't help but shudder at the thought of what could have happened if I had stayed a moment longer. The off-grid homestead that was meant to be my safe haven had turned into a living nightmare. And the memory of the demonic entity that haunted it would forever be etched in my mind, reminding me of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the woods. As the final shadows of the night recede and the echoes of our tales fade into the darkness, We bid you farewell from the dark masquerade. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the realms of the unknown and the unexplained. But fear not, dear friends, for the night is ever alive with whispers and secrets waiting to be uncovered. Until we meet again beneath the cloak of midnight, may your dreams be haunted by the echoes of our stories and the promise of new adventures yet to come. Remember to like, comment, and share your favorite tales, and share your own encounters with the darkness below. Until next time, may the night embrace you in its chilling embrace, and may the mysteries of the dark masquerade continue to thrill and enthrall. Good night and sweet dreams, if you dare.